Okay, guys, welcome back to the Nick and Joe Show. I'm Nick, he's Joe, and we've had an amazing hour and a half. I hope you found our topics interesting and informative and maybe just a little entertaining now and then. We've got another issue for you that's not entertaining. As a matter of fact, it's tragic. It's
I think the whole show's been tragic.
Yeah, from that perspective, yeah, I guess you're right. But this one especially so, because this one deals with euthanasia. Now, I'm going to let Joseph bring you up to speed on it, but basically everything we were told wouldn't happen when this whole thing got started is now happening. So, Joseph, take it away.
Okay. Well, as people know, we have legal euthanasia in Canada. And we've had it for a few years, not that long. I was just typing euthanasia into my computer, and I can't believe I have no idea how I did it, but that looked kind of crazy. Anyway, we haven't had it that long in Canada, a few years, handful of years, and when the bill that was introduced by Parliament, I'm not going to go back to the court case because, you know, I have issues with the court case, but let's just say, just in terms of summarizing the history, that the Supreme Court in Canada ruled, I think it was in 2015, that the Criminal Code prohibition against medically assisted suicide, that is to say doctors helping patients to kill themselves, that was unconstitutional, and they gave Parliament a certain amount of time to come back with a new law that allowed it to happen, but introduced certain regulations and controls. So that was sort of the history. It goes back a little further than that, but for the purpose of this show, let's not get into that, Nick. So Parliament introduces a bill to legalize medically assisted dying. In other words, euthanasia.
That's what they called it, yep.
And there were safeguards built in. I will give the government of the day credit that they tried to put in safeguards. Safeguards, for instance, that there was a waiting period, that if you wanted to take advantage of this particular service, that you had to wait for a certain period of time. And this was an opportunity for you. The theory being it would be an opportunity for you to second guess, to reconsider. Number one. Number two, you had to have a terminal illness. You had to be terminally ill. You're going to die. You have cancer. It's inoperable. You have a month to live. You don't want to suffer for that month. You can end your life. You can apply, have the doctor, give you an injection or however it works, okay? And so you have to be terminally ill. There's a period of time. You have to be, obviously you have to be an adult, so you have to be old enough to give your consent. All of these things were basically supposed to be safeguards. And we said, at the time, well, what about people who are just depressed? Oh, no, that can't happen, we were told. Look at the safeguards we built in. And again, to be fair, the safeguards that were built in did, in fact, prevent anyone who was just depressed from taking advantage of this service. Anyway, here we are now, without the courts having stepped in to say, Parliament, what you are doing, the rules that you've put in place, the restrictions, the limits are unconstitutional. No court has ruled this. But the government, of its own initiative, the same government that promised us solemnly that these were the safeguards and that it would never come to this very same government, on its own initiative, has decided now to introduce legislation allowing people to take advantage of assisted suicide who are not terminally ill. and to take advantage not only not terminally ill, but they don't have to have the waiting period anymore if the bill passes. And youth who are deemed to be old enough and mature enough to make their own medical decisions, which is already a term in law, are going to be able to take advantage of this as well.
Well, that aspect of it really troubles me, because who's to determine the maturity of a 14-year-old? Well, as you know, having raised kids yourself, kids at 14, if you had a group of 14-year-olds of 100 of them in a room, God help you, first of all, and secondly, the maturity level of each one could be wildly different. Some are very mature, others are, still 8 years old in their heads. Well, so who makes the call about who's mature and who isn't? Well, is it the parents? Is it the child? Do they just leave it to the child? And they are children. To think that they're not is a fool's errand as well. So how do they decide who is competent to make that decision?
Well, this is an area of law that already exists, and it already exists because of the area of medical procedures. So normally, for a medical procedure, a parent has to give their consent if you're under 18 years old. But if you're 16 or 17 years old and the medical procedure is important, and you can go and your parents say no, then you could apply. I believe you would apply to the court for permission to proceed based on, and the court looks at it and says, well, is this teenager, this adolescent, old enough and mature enough to understand the nature of the decision and to make the decision, notwithstanding the view of the parents. And everything in that case is on a case-by-case basis. So there is no black and white rule. But let's just say that it doesn't matter. Let's just say that it's 18 years old and you have to have parental consent up to 18 years old. Full stop, end of story, Nick. Once you've decided that depression is a sufficient reason to have medical-assisted suicide, whether you're 20 years old or 25 years old or 30 years old or 18 years old, once you've made that decision as a society and you're promoting the fact that you've made that decision as a society, that this has now become a right in this society, or will be, then it's only a very small step to saying, well, why wouldn't I, as a 17-year-old who just lost a boyfriend, I'm having problems at school, maybe I'm being bullied on the internet, okay? Why shouldn't I have the right to take my own life? And here's the danger in it, Nick. The danger in it is that teenagers can take their own lives irrespective of what the government says or whether or not a doctor is actually providing assistance in doing that. And so essentially what you're doing is you are setting an example. And the example that you're setting is when life is tough, that's a sufficient reason to pull the plug on yourself. And whether the state sanctions it or not, you're still setting that example. So the danger is there already, irrespective of whether or not it's an actual doctor legally according to the law giving you an injection. So kids will just go and get pills. And we already know that this is a problem. And, this is bullying is not the common thread when it comes to spikes in suicide rates in different communities. Okay? bullying's a bad thing. Don't get me wrong. But what is the number one predictor for an increase in suicides in a particular community is a high-profile suicide. In other words, when somebody who is well-liked in a particular community commits suicide, or well-known, or maybe it's a celebrity, then you can then the number of suicides in that particular community will almost invariably increase. It's a copycat thing.
Well, yeah, that's true, and I think that you also have a problem with people giving up far too easily. Like, one of the things that builds character is getting through difficult times, and when you take a look at the generations that have come before, and I'm not picking anyone in general, look at them all, they've all gone through some incredibly hard times, and the people who rise to the surface are the ones who deal with life's challenges most effectively. And you can't do that if people don't want to work through their problems. They just as soon not have them, and if the only way to get rid of them is to kill yourself, that's really unhealthy for the society at large, never mind the individual.
To say the least.
Yeah, no kidding.
And you know, Nick, it's not just that. What really frightens me, especially when it comes to younger people, is the continued obsession that our leaders have with climate change and their reliance on the most extreme presentation of climate change in order to be able to force through their policy choices. In other words, a Justin Trudeau is not going to come to you and say, we think that it's better for the environment if we reduce our consumption on oil, and therefore over a period of time we're going to put in regulations and maybe we'll have a carbon tax, etc. No, he won't present it that way. What he will do is he will present it as, this is an existential threat to the human race, to our very world. And you hear that from Justin Trudeau, you hear that from Joe Biden, you hear that from David Suzuki, you hear that from over and over and over again, where younger people are hearing basically that the world is going to end, and it's going to end soon. And they are going to suffer horribly. And so why wouldn't you be thinking of a way out?
This is, I guess what troubles me about our culture in general is you have this situation where you're feeding the fire. Because, as you point out, if the world is going to end tomorrow, then why not spare myself the anxiety of going through the ending, and I'll end it myself in my own terms, in my own way. So it's so narcissistic, it's so defeatist, and it just really bothers me because, for one thing, everybody who's ever predicted the end of the world has always been wrong. Now, one of these days they're going to be right. But until then, and we don't know when that's going to be, live life to the fullest. Don't look at yourself in the mirror and say, it's not worth it, because everybody has something to contribute, and to throw it away just because you happen to be having a bad day, I say that. I don't mean to put down mental health issues and things like that, but let's face it, some of these kids, if they just had a mentor to look up to, or somebody to, help them through their situation, either with a little tough love or a little soft love once in a while, a hug and a pat on the head and say, look, you'll get through this, don't worry about it. Or the other end of the coin is, are you going to lay there and bleed, or are you going to cowboy up? One way or the other, you've got to move on with life. You can't just you only get the chance to pull that parachute once. And it just bothers me immensely that far too many people would rather